Welcome to APUSH. Today we're going to continue our study of American imperialism by introducing the Roosevelt Corollary. So, here are your objectives for today, and let's get to it. So, as you hopefully remember last time, the United States is now a world power. We beat up on Spain, we annexed a bunch of territory, we now half own Cuba, and we've got some territories in the Pacific. So, all that's pretty solid. And so, we figure that it's about time for us to start playing a larger role in imperialism in general. So, now that we have the Philippines, we become much more interested in East Asian politics, and we're going to start inserting ourselves into Chinese and Japanese politics. So that's exciting, and I'm sure that'll end, well for us with no hard feelings for many Asian nations. So the way that we insert ourselves into Asian imperial politics is through what's called the open door policy. As you can clearly see on this map, European powers have been gaining spheres of influence in China since the 1800s, going back to the First Opium War in 1843. But all of the European powers have been carving up parts of China where they hold their laws hold sway. And so the goal, of course, is to set up these ports that are going to be these treaty ports that are going to be sources of trade, but the United States, as you hopefully notice from this map, does not have one, which is problematic because we're a real nation. So shouldn't we have treaty ports too? We've got this awesome recoaling station in the Philippines. It'd be really nice to use that to be able to trade with China. So we propose what's called the open door policy, which tries to convince the European powers to stop carving up China, and basically says, can't we all exploit the Chinese equally? Can't we just all have an open door to each other's territories in China? I mean, there's a lot of Chinese people, and we can all be even if we all try to like sell them everything that we make, there's still going to be a market in China. And so the open door policy attempts to eliminate these sort of nationalistic rivalries and allow everyone to trade in China. And in order to help back this up, we help put down the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion is an anti-Western, anti-Qing dynasty rebellion in China, in which a group of Chinese rebels known as the Boxers seized control of treaty ports, captured the capital of Beijing, and basically tried to force out all foreign powers. And so the United States, along with other European powers, launched a invasion of China. Oh, and Japan. I shouldn't forget Japan. Japan also joined this international coalition, and we all together went, defeated the Boxers, ensured that the rump of the Qing dynasty stayed in power, and that we could continue to trade with China for a while. So this is an example of us violating the territoriality of China in order to establish our treaty rights and our ability to trade with China. So that's pretty solid. And then President McKinley's assassinated. Uh, I know this happened kind of suddenly, and we'll tell the story more completely tomorrow when we get into the rise of Theodore Roosevelt. But McKinley was assassinated by an anarchist named Leon Czolgosz. And again, we'll get more into detail with that tomorrow. But for now, what it means is noted Jingo Theodore Roosevelt has become president of the United States. And so if you thought our foreign policy was bellicose and aggressive before, we're about to turn it up to 11. So, for example, Japan has been expanding pretty rapidly since the Meiji Restoration era of the 1860s. They won their own treaty war against China in the 1880s, and they defeated the Russians in the Russo-Japanese War right around 1900. So Theodore Roosevelt throws himself in the middle of this and basically stops Japan from getting too much territory in Asia, and helps Russia save face despite the fact that they absolutely got smashed at the Battle of Tsushima. And so Theodore Roosevelt ironically wins a Nobel Peace Prize for basically denying Japan the spoils of the Russo-Japanese War, which, man, if you think that Japan is going to forget that, they are not. So we have that piece here. And this also leads to a rise in anti Japanese sentiment, especially as an increasing number of Japanese people have been migrating to the west coast of the United States. And so there's this massively racist movement to try to segregate Japanese people. And in the end, we work out a compromise with Japan, something called the Gentleman's Agreement, by which we're not going to pass any laws specifically discriminating against Japanese people if the Japanese government forbids its citizens from moving here. And so, win win, I think. In the Americas, Roosevelt starts adopting an informal policy called the Roosevelt Corollary. He gives a speech in which he basically describes the United States using what he calls a international police power to solve problems within Latin America. This is considered an addendum to the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine, of course, saying European powers stay out of the Americas, with the implication now that if you stay out of the Americas, we will police things in the Americas to your liking. I mean, think back to the Venezuelan crisis, where we basically ruled in England's favor, but we wouldn't let them actually do that themselves. And so we're going to start using a combination of arbitration and the quote unquote big stick, which in this case is our new battleship fleet, to exert power within the Western Hemisphere and basically become the de facto ruler of the Western Hemisphere. Which, honestly, to some extent, I guess you could argue we were already that, but it becomes much more apparent and obvious during this time period. So, Monroe Doctrine, of course, keep Europeans out. And now, Roosevelt Corollary, we're going to bring stability to these areas and we're going to intervene if necessary. So, for example, England has issues with debt repayment in the Dominican Republic. Teddy Roosevelt is going to kindly remind England that the Monroe Doctrine says that you stay the heck out, but then we're going to invade and force the Dominican Republic to pay their debts. So, the difference there, I guess, is American sovereignty in this situation. And so this happens in Cuba, of course. It's formalized in the Platt Amendment, the idea that, like, we don't own Cuba because the Teller Amendment prevented us from annexing them, but we can intervene whenever we want, and we're going to do it relatively often. And whenever we intervene, we seize the customs house, the place where they collect the tariff duties, and then distribute that money to Cuba's creditors in the United States and elsewhere, because clearly the Cubans can't be trusted to distribute it slash pay their own creditors. And so when you default on your debts, we're going to invade your country and then we're going to pay your debts for you. This happened all over the place in the early 1900s and then would continue throughout the rest of the first half of the century, at least until the Second World War. So we intervene in all these places in the first 6 years of the new century. And then we invade all these places in the years after. So, yeah. One of the biggest interventions, and probably the most long lasting for the United States, is the digging of the Panama Canal. The United States had long wanted a canal through Central America somewhere, for what I hope are obvious reasons. But we'd struggled to get the nation of Colombia to get on board with this. They kept rebuffing American attempts to dig this canal. Then they'd given the treaty to a bunch of French people who, on between struggling with their governments constantly collapsing and getting kicked around by Germany, had yet to finish the project, which outraged us. And they had the most prime real estate. I mean, seriously, like the Isthmus of Panama is the place that you should dig a canal if you're going to try to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, right? So we, of course, looked for some alternatives, including a proposed canal across Nicaragua, which, man, not as nice. Plus, some scientists had thought they had discovered a rare breed of freshwater shark in Lake Nicaragua here. And so T. Theodore Roosevelt, noted environmentalist, really didn't like this canal plan because it would have meant exterminating the sharks. It turns out that they actually were not a unique form of sharks. They were just a normal breed of sharks, but we thought they were. So, yeah. So that's one of the reasons why this canal didn't work. And then the other reason, of course, is it's like 6 times as long. So, how do we convince Colombia to help us to let us dig a canal through their territory? Well, what if it wasn't their territory anymore? So we sponsored a rebellion in Panama, and with the tacit support of the Marines and the US Navy, prevented Colombia from stopping them. So here's Theodore Roosevelt disembarking in order to help ensure that Panama becomes independent. Here he is digging the canal and throwing the dirt on Bogota. And here he is taking all the money from a canal away from Colombia and more or less keeping it for ourselves. So, in exchange for allowing this new country of Panama, allowing the United States to dig this canal, we ended up we ended up getting control of the canal. And so the United States would dig the canal, and we would also get the joy of getting yellow fever from the from trying to send our workers down to the jungles of Panama. In order to combat this yellow fever, we dumped ludicrous amounts of pesticides in Panama, which are have environmental consequences to this day. But on the bright side, we get this canal and what's called the Panama Canal Zone, which the United States is going to control as a protectorate. So I think it's probably worth it, maybe. So now we have all of these territories. And we understand that the United States has had territories for a long time, right? I mean, thinking back to the Ohio River Valley, the Northwest Territory, all these other territories, the United States having territories is not like a new thing. What is new is that we're going to be administering these territories somewhat differently because the Northwest Ordinance lays a pathway for territories to become states. And when they get to a certain population, then of course they can apply for statehood, they can choose their own representatives, things like that. But what if we're not actually planning to make them states? What if they already have a population that would allow them for statehood, but these people are not like the type of people that we think should be representing themselves? I'll let you assume. I'm assuming you can guess what we're saying here. So we passed something called the insular cases. These are the ones that I thought were in the slides yesterday, but clearly were not. The Supreme Court passes a series of rulings called the insular cases, which basically argues that the Constitution does not follow the flag because the people in these areas are not self-governing peoples, quote unquote, on account of their less than whiteness. We're not going to give them self government. We're not going to allow them to run their own territories, and we don't have to provide them with constitutional rights. So, as long as we're not planning on making these territories into states, we don't have to actually give them rights or representation. With the idea being that maybe later, if enough white people get there, then we'll change our mind. Or if the people can learn to govern themselves by, I guess, becoming whiter. I'm not quite clear on how that would work. But the benefit for us is now we get all these naval bases and recoaling stations all over the world, like, for example, Guantanamo Bay, a place in which, constitutional protections don't necessarily apply to the people being held there. So we've got these recoaling stations. We're a world power. We can refuel our ships around the world. We get involved in other people's politics. We can intervene in Latin America. We're also becoming a kingmaker in Asia. And so the United States in the early parts of the 1900s is becoming a world power, and you could start to argue is close to becoming the world power. So that's super exciting. In order to show off our power, we send our battleship fleet on a voyage around the world. The quote unquote voyage of the Great White Fleet is here's your voyage of the Great White Fleet is actually kind of a fiasco, but it's a way for us to like wave the flag in all these different places, to go through the Suez Canal and to navigate our way around Australia and to show everyone that the United States has arrived and we're a real country that you have to pay attention to now. So that's good, I think. So this brings us to the end of the lesson for today. Your goal here is make sure you can answer all of these questions in some detail and also understand the documents. And tomorrow we'll start talking about the domestic side of Theodore Roosevelt basically getting propelled into the presidency because of an assassin's bullet.